The moment a 90-pound dog decides your child matters more than anything, you feel it. The Rottweiler's name was Ember, and he had been with the Lars family for 3 years before Ingrid stopped dismissing what he was doing. She was a physical therapist. She thought this mattered. It would turn out that her professional knowledge was exactly what delayed her understanding. Lars and Ingrid had Oscar, who was 14 months and had recently learned to point at things as a method of requesting them. She pointed at Ember constantly. He bore this with the patience of an animal who had already decided that Oscar was the most important thing in the building. The behavior started on a Tuesday. Nothing obvious. Ember began positioning himself between Oscar and a specific area of the house. Not aggressively, not anxiously, simply with the calm, particular resolve of an animal executing a task that required no audience approval. He would stand there, he would wait. If Oscar moved toward the area, he moved with her. If she reached for something, he was already there. Ingrid moved him the first time. He returned before she'd crossed the room. She moved him the second time with greater deliberateness. He returned in under 4 minutes. By the third day, she'd begun consulting her physical therapist colleagues about canine resource guarding. The wrong question, arriving from the wrong framework, producing entirely wrong conclusions. Her expertise was the problem. She had a category for what she was observing. The category was incorrect. Lars was less certain. He had no professional framework to apply, which meant he was watching what was actually happening instead of watching for confirmation of what he already thought was happening. He mentioned it to his brother. His brother said he'd heard of something like this. Lars said he'd heard of it too. Neither of them said the thing out loud because it sounded like the kind of thing you didn't say until you had proof. On the 7th night, Ingrid sat on the kitchen floor at 11 p.m. with her back against the refrigerator, watching Ember maintain his position near the area he'd been attending to all week. She had a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. She had her phone with a browser open to a veterinary behavior website she wasn't reading. She was watching the dog. He turned and looked at her once, directly, the kind of look that carries information. Then he turned back. 2 days later, the thing happened. The details are specific, which is why they matter. Ember began a behavior he had never exhibited in 3 years. He moved from his position and pressed himself against Lars's legs repeatedly in the direction of the phone that was sitting on the counter. Lars reached for it. Ember continued pressing toward it. Lars called the number he needed to call. What the allergist found was disturbed wasp nest in the play equipment. The allergist explained the science afterward. Dogs can detect the pheromone release of an agitated colony. The window between detectable and symptomatic in this specific case was the window in which Ember had been standing in exactly that spot, in exactly that position, for exactly that many days. That nest had over 300 workers. One sting was a medical emergency for a child that size, the allergist said. Ingrid wrote it down. Not because she needed to, she would remember it without writing, but because she needed to do something with her hands in that moment. She had a category now. The category was, I had a professional framework that was wrong. The dog had no professional framework and was right. This is not an abstract thing. The family went through the math together later. The number of days, the progression of what had been building, the window they'd had. Ember had started attending to the situation before any instrument would have detected it, before any symptom would have been visible, before any human sense would have registered anything as wrong. He was working from a different data set. The family modified the house. They had the inspection. They followed the protocol. They thanked everyone they were supposed to thank. What they couldn't do was fully account for Ember's contribution in any of the official paperwork. There wasn't a field for it. There isn't a field for it. The allergist put early detection in the report. Early detection is accurate. It is also incomplete. Ingrid sits differently on the kitchen floor now. Differently than she sat in the beginning of this story. Lower, more settled. With Ember beside her instead of across the room from her, she had 20 years of professional training. She had a dog who'd been paying attention to things she didn't have instruments to measure. She doesn't say she was wrong. She says she was working with incomplete data. Ember has no opinion on the distinction. He is busy attending to Oscar, who is 14 months and has recently learned that pointing at the dog works somewhat better than pointing at most other things. He is patient with her about it. He has always been patient. Has your dog ever done something that didn't make sense? until suddenly it did? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe so the next story finds you before the noise does.